All right. So, as many of you know, we do videos on a variety of topics. And a couple months ago, we did a video out in front of the Mormon Temple. Actually, there's a church next to the Mormon Temple, and we were out there with some signs confronting some of the Mormon doctrinal issues. And from the video that we put up on the internet, of course we get a lot of interaction, pro and con, and it gives us opportunity, to challenge the Mormons and answer questions, and it also gives a platform for ex-Mormons to express their opinions. So, what happened was there's a gal who I won't mention her name. She contacted us here recently, and she saw our video and wanted to get together with us, and we've had some interesting conversation. And we're here today. She doesn't want to be on camera, and that's fine. But we'd like to talk to her about her experience of what it was like, and what came about that began to challenge her Mormonism, and why is it that the process that it takes sometimes to leave the Mormon Church. A lot of people don't realize how challenging that is for people, because there's economic issues, there's social issues, and there's all kinds of different Mormons. There's Jack Mormons. You have people that are involved in the Mormon Church for business reasons. You have those that have been raised in it and they don't know anything else. And so for them to come out, if everybody they know is involved in the LDS Church, they don't know where to go, and then they're going to be ostracized as well. And so our friend here is going to share a little bit of her testimony of her process of how it came about her leaving the LDS Church. So what were some of the beginning things that led you to question? You mentioned you had your first experience with the Jack Mormons.
Well, that wasn't my first.
No?
I had some doubts. Growing up in the church, I questioned that whole idea, because I don't know if they still teach this, but back then there are the three kingdoms: the celestial, the terrestrial, and the telestial kingdoms that dead people can go to.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thinking or the teaching back then was that God the Father would be over the celestial kingdom, Jesus would be over the terrestrial, and the Holy Ghost would be over the telestial, would be the rulers over those kingdoms. And in my mind, I'm thinking that means if I become exalted and go to the celestial kingdom, I would be over Jesus. And that did not set well with me. Did not like that idea at all. That everything that Jesus... Sorry, I get really emotional talking about him. Everything he did, dying for us and saving us, that was not right. Because I knew I was a sinner, and I had to have Jesus's crucifixion to save me. And so that did not set right with me. That was one of the first things that got me. And then I'm trying to think beyond that, what were some of my other doubts? I suppose just some of the normal things, how I saw people live, and especially when I moved to Utah and lived down there amongst them, and they weren't as active in a lot of ways, or seemed as spiritual, I guess you might say, as ones that I grew up with. And there was drinking and things. In fact, some people would have parties where the adults would supply the liquor to underage kids and things, and that's where I learned to do some drinking, was down there. So I became inactive for a while. And then I met who now is my ex-husband. I met him when I went to the local junior college here. And so we ended up getting married, and we had a child. And I was thinking, we needed to have a religion. And so all I knew, he had been born and raised Catholic, and all I knew was Mormonism. And so I started studying more about it and decided that because the literature that they put out is actually written to persuade people to believe in it, and that there can't be any other way to believe. And so I decided that yes, that should be the religion we go with. My ex did not join because of me. He joined because of another LDS friend he had, who he was impressed with this person, and so he joined too. And then so we proceeded to have 5 children, and over the years there were some good times, but it was really a bad marriage, and we had the enemy big time in our home. At that time I did not realize that was the case, but there were so many things that were pretty awful in that marriage, and it got to the point where I did need to divorce him. And so at that time I was thinking, well, I'm going to need God more than ever in my life, and so I wanted to know more about him than I'd ever known about him in my life. So that started my journey. I had stopped going to church, and by then most of the children were out of the home. I had one son stay with me, and my ex had one son with him. And in my head, my most important duty was to find a mate again.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was out and about, going out dancing and this and that, trying to come up with who I thought was Mr. Right, and I came across many Mr. Wrongs.
Now, was it in your mind? I know how the Mormon idea is that the husband calls you out of the grave. Was that part of your thinking too, or not?
Well, my ex and I did go to the temple one time.
Oh, okay.
But let me tell you, it creeped me out so bad. It was because I'd never heard anything about it. They didn't talk about it.
So you didn't get married in the temple?
We got married first in the church, in the LDS church. We got married there, and then after waiting for, I don't know, maybe a year, whatever, we waited till we were worthy.
Okay, yeah.
to go to the temple, and went that one time, and it just was oh my gosh, that we never could talk about it because they caution you not to even talk about with husband and wife, not to even talk about what goes on in there.
Right.
But
now,
it was
let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
When you were saying about becoming worthy, who determines if you're worthy to go to the temple?
the bishop.
And so
bishop.
you do kind of maybe a yearly assessment to whether you're yearly or you're worthy?
You have to go and have like tithing settlements, and to make sure you're up with your tithing, and then they, at those meetings, they ask you, and some of this is not real fresh in my memory.
But you have to get a temple recommend.
Have to get a temple
Right.
recommend. That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And so depending on how you answer those questions, if you're not drinking coffee or any of those bad things,
Yeah.
and up on your tithing, and you're not having extramarital affairs and whatever, so then you can get your temple recommend. So we went there, and it just blew me away. I had no idea. So that was the first and only time we ever went.
So what exactly blew you away about it?
Well, the washings in the beginning, they back then, that was even real personal, where they
They touched you.
touched
No.
the private areas.
Now they have a veil And
the veil.
do they do this through the veil? Has somebody?
That was prior to, that was one of the first things they do, is to get you all washed and
Okay.
ready for, and then for the rest of it. And then they, I mean, in my recollection, like I said, it creeped me out, so I kind of put a lot of that out of my head, and I haven't read up on it for quite some time. But okay, I mean, after the, I didn't read up on it before we went there, but I'm talking about after. Anyway, and then the part about that in the meeting where they did separate the men and the women, and but they had those what are they called, the, like, where you had to, like, say that you would slit your throat or cut out your bowels.
Yes.
Oh yeah,
If you ever did talk.
that's
Yes.
some stuff that's left over from Masonic Ritual.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, because Joseph Smith was a Freemason.
That's right.
Yeah.
Correct. But I did not know any of that, of course,
And so
prior to that.
when you had to say that, what did you think when they had you say that?
Yeah, I didn't like it, but I had been taught obedience, through the Mormon Church, and
Sure.
so in fact, there's a saying that I learned, that if the prophet has spoken, the thinking has been done.
Right.
Yeah, and that's pretty bad, really, that you're not allowed to do thinking on your own.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was the last time we ever went. And then we just proceeded to have this, like I said, sometimes good times, but a lot of bad times. And I suffered big time depression. Oh, I was depressed so much of the time. And it was severe. And then I'd have these bad nightmares where I was in some kind of a pit, and I was trying to get out, and I was clawing and trying to get out, and almost like suffocating, and I had those repeatedly. So anyway, like I said, it got to the point where I did need to divorce him, and so I started my journey of trying to find out who God was. But like I was saying, I think prior to this recording, anyway, that I was also thinking the most important thing was to find a male companion, because I was so lonely, and I had this void that
Sure.
I needed to fill, a spiritual void. And so I was out doing that a lot of the time, and then once in a while I'd think, but I need to find out who God is. Oh, and then I remember I met a gal, and I worked in the school district, and she was our behavior specialist, and she just took me under her wing, and she was helping me to think in different ways, because that's a problem with people, like if they're born into poverty, say, they don't know any other way to think.
Sure.
And so the cycle keeps on going. And that's the same with, like in Mormonism, a cult, that's the only way you know how to think, really, because you never have been taught other ways. So she was teaching me different ways to think, and helping me. And she also encouraged me to go to a divorce recovery group, and that's where I met a gal who became a really good friend of mine. Excuse me. And we would and she also came from a background that didn't really have much religion in her. I mean, she came from a background that was different than mine, in that she didn't have much religion, and so she was also searching for who God was. So she'd come over to my house, and we'd spend hours talking about a lot of different things, but trying to figure out who God was, and not really knowing, coming up with a good definition or anything.
Yeah, and who do you turn to, right?
Yes.
When you've been brainwashed to believe that you just came out of the ultimate experience with God, and
and the only true church.
And the only true church,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So then, and she did find a church that she invited me to, and I believe that one was the like more Pentecostal
Mm-hmm.
type, and so I did enjoy that, and then I may have and then she ended up moving away over to the other side of the state, and I'm trying to think and I think at that point is at some point after I'd not found Mr. Right, in fact several Mr. Wrongs, and decided I need to really get serious about finding out whether the church is true or not and who God is. And that's when I started going on the computer to look up what was called AntiMormon Literature.
Right.
That's what the church dubs it.
Mm-hmm.
But they had cautioned us very severely never to look up any of that stuff. And so it scared me.
Yeah.
So I'd type a little bit, read a little bit, and I'd get scared and have to stop. And then I just kind of kept after it till I was getting braver and braver, and eventually printing out reams of information.
Oh, yeah.
And finding out things I'd never ever heard of before, and even finding contradictions in the Book of Mormon, in the D&C, Doctrine and Covenants, they call it Pearl of Great Price.
Yeah.
And a lot of it didn't line up with the Bible, but of course Mormons are taught that the Bible is only correct as far as it is translated correctly,
Mm-hmm.
and so that automatically puts it in great doubt.
Right.
So
And-
at this point, had you shared any of this newfound knowledge with your children or sisters and brothers or Mormon friends?
None of them. Well, friends, yes. Well, no, sorry, because I really did not have any mentor at all. That's right. I didn't have. It was pretty much just me
Okay.
trying to figure it out, because I hadn't met anybody that talked to me about any of that information.
So this went on for several years of you just aimlessly searching on your
About
own.
10 years, and
Wow.
I call it my wandering in the desert years.
Yeah.
So but at some point I did decide that I needed to show my mom, because my mom, even in the LDS Church, was a gospel doctrine teacher. She was one that they thought of as pretty knowledgeable in the doctrine of the church, and so I had found things about polygamy, I'm pretty sure it was, in the Book of Mormon that were totally contradictory, and I wanted to show her these things and see what she thought. And I was there in this other town, living in a different town than her, and I started going, because I couldn't find a Book of Mormon in my house for some reason. I'm thinking all of this is a God thing. I couldn't find the Book of Mormon, so I went to like the Goodwill and different used places like that, and this is more of a God thing, I'm certain of it. I could not find Book of Mormons in any of those places, and that's not normal. And then I went to this used bookstore, same thing, no Book of Mormon, but I found this book called Out of Mormonism. And I read that thing so quickly because she sounded just like me, and I just ate it up. And in the end of the book it said, if you want a mentor, we can hook you up with somebody that would be an ex-Mormon
Do you
Christian.
remember who the author was of that book?
I don't.
Oh, okay.
I should have looked it up last night after we talked about it, but I didn't think of it. So, because anyway, when you were talking to me, it was late in.
I'll look
later
it up.
for me. But
I'll
anyway,
look it up.
So, and actually they just gave an address, and that to me was snail mail, and I didn't want to wait that long.
Yeah.
And so I looked on the internet and found that they had a website, and got in touch with them, and they hooked me up with a gal, and she was sending me more information than I'd even come across. That was even more convincing. And she taught me the salvation prayer, which Mormon people know nothing about.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, though, I had gotten to where the enemy was after me big time to not lose me out of Mormonism. And in my head, it felt like a ping pong table, that the phrases kept going back and forth in my head. The church is true, it's not true. It's church is true, it's not true. I mean, it was just driving me crazy. And
let me comment on that just for a second, because the Bible says to take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. And oftentimes when people are right on the verge of being saved, the enemy will begin to just barrage your thought life with confusion and fear. And Paul wrote to Timothy, and he said that God didn't give us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. And so fear is one of the biggest tools the devil has to manipulate us.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I also was suicidal because I did not know how to deal with any of that. It was just so strong. And so I remember I was living alone in an apartment at that point. And so that night when I went to bed, I decided to say that salvation prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And I cry every time I tell this story. Because it was still so vivid to me.
Changed your life.
It changed my life. I said the prayer and immediately felt like real chains falling off my body. I was free, and I felt saved, totally saved at that moment, and I knew who God was. And that was when I finally knew who God was after 10 years of searching for Him.
Wow.
And so it's been a journey. Okay, I'll try to compose myself. But yeah, it was just so beautiful, so precious, so wonderful.
Is that the book?
Yes, it is. Judy Robertson, yes.
Judy Robertson.
That is totally it.
Okay.
So anyway, so then, of course, I still had what I call garbage to get out of my head.
Sure.
From the Mormon thinking. And then to replace it with truth. Of course, Jesus is what the truth is. And where before I would read the Bible, and a lot of the time it didn't make sense to me, and especially because in Mormonism you have to read the King James. It's a requirement. You can only read the King James.
Yeah, even though they question its reliability.
That's exactly right. I know. And so it wasn't making sense to me, but once I was born again, it started making sense. I mean, not always, but and I could read the different versions to have it make more sense.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get enough of it. I just ate it up. I was going to several different Bible studies as I moved back over to this area. I had gone to some over there in that other city too. And, learning so much. And anyway, so here I am. How many years later is this now? I can't quite remember how many years later, but
so you were in Mormonism for at least 50 years.
Almost 50 years.
Yeah,
almost 50 years. And it used to be a lot more uncommon for anybody to be able to come out of Mormonism and become a born again Christian. These days, because of the internet and different things, it's becoming more common.
They can't control people like they used to.
Now, when you really realized you were saved and you came out of Mormonism and that you loved Jesus, did you at that point share any of that with your family?
Yes, yes. I had decided that I was going to talk to every one of my siblings about it, and I proceeded to do that. I had one brother who actually confessed that he was an atheist, and I printed out a bunch of material, and his wife made him read it. And so he decided he wasn't an atheist anymore, but he's still not sure what he is. And then I didn't have very good luck. In fact, one sister cut me off for probably a year.
Mm-hmm.
She wouldn't talk to me anymore. And another sister, I sent her via email. One of the questions that I like to ask Mormons is, if all the gods had to be humans first, how was anything created in the first place? And she kind of put, oh, well, that's pretty deep. And I don't like to do that deep of thinking. I just like to let faith lead and guide.
Mm-hmm.
And that was her basic answer.
Yeah.
But I did subsequently, I was able to talk more with her about different things. I told her, if you ever have any doubts about Joseph Smith, and she says, yes, I do have doubts about Joseph Smith, that she could ask me things, and I would keep mentioning things to her, but she's just decided that she'd rather be an active person in that church. And the other sister, excuse me, the other sister that wouldn't talk to me, she gradually we did make up, and she's come back around. But that topic of anything Christianity is basically taboo with them. They can talk to me all they want about Mormonism, but I'm not allowed to talk.
They control the narrative.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But I sneak in certain things, little scriptures here and there as I can, with my positive notes that I send them, on Sundays. And what I feel, I have to feel like it's something that they would accept. Otherwise, they'll get mad at me, and I don't want that. So, but yeah, so. And then, because of living with my mom, who was active LDS, I would often have the missionaries come to the door, and I would stand there and talk to them and try to convince them. And I've talked to other people as the Lord has led people to me. I've done quite a bit of witnessing, and so yes, in fact I loved that for a long time. I did that a lot, because by then I knew my information. I knew my Christianity really well, and I knew my Mormonism, the Mormonism really well, so I could, talk to them. And
now, when you begin to look into other churches, I know, the Mormon Church is very structured.
yes.
And so from going from that to a Pentecostal church, that must have been a big shock,
that
huh?
was a trip. Yes, that was trippy. But yeah, so I know I did question that for a while, because that's what Mormonism say, is that because look at them, they don't have any organization, they don't have anybody that's the head of them, and they have all these different names of their churches. But what I learned, and is the truth, is that we are the body of Christ.
Right. It doesn't matter what's written on the door.
That's correct, or the building. And of course there's some Christian churches who, nowadays it's gotten somewhat worse too, that have incorrect teachings.
Sure.
And so you have to know your Bible to combat that even. But anyway, that was one thing that they've always used, is look at our organization and look at how wealthy we are, because we're all just, this one big church, true church. And anyway, so
yeah.
Now, can you remember back that far to where the Mormons did not let the blacks have the priesthood.
I was I was in the church when that was also happening, but I cannot remember the date.
Yeah, they changed that in 1978.
Oh, it was 78.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and I can't do the math quick enough to...
Yeah, and if you, as a matter of fact, if you look at a Book of Mormon prior to that, and you look at a modern Book of Mormon, you'll find that some of the language has been changed as well.
Definitely. In fact, I think I was telling, I can't remember who I was telling this to recently, but I did have a book. Oh, I know. It's the Bible study leader that comes here, and I'm her friend, and I was telling her about that book, and I thought it was a book that said 1,000 some changes to the Book of Mormon, but it's over 3,000.
Yeah.
And the Tanners.
Yeah.
Gerald and Sandra
Tanner. Yeah, because they were ex-Mormons.
Yes,
And
and
then
we were
Ed
cautioned.
Decker,
yes.
yeah.
But we were cautioned from the pulpit to never ever read any of their information. they were like super duper,
Anathema.
Yeah, outcasts. And but in fact, I met Sandra Tanner. I was able to go down to Utah. It was in Utah that they were having this conference called Compassionate Boldness, teaching us how to better witness to Mormons. And I went down there, and she was there, so I got to meet her.
Yeah, we've had a chance to meet her as well years ago, and it was during the Winter Olympics when we were down. We were down there for about a month doing street evangelism. And we got a chance to meet her then. And then her husband's health began to fail. I forget he had, I forget exactly what it was, but dementia basically. Yeah. And then she just recently, here in the past couple of years, she's stepped down from her ministry.
Right, yeah. I try to keep track of them too. So here I am today, loving Jesus, loving truth.
Well, that's great. That's an amazing story.
Have any of your family, have they sent missionaries to talk with you since you've been back here?
I did have my name taken off the rolls. Whether they actually even do that, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But that was quite a process because